The wound does not kill him quickly enough. That is the first thing to understand. Robert Baratheon, first of his name, King of the Seven Kingdoms, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, Protector of the realm, he lingers. The boar opens him deeply, savagely, the way only nature can humble a man who has spent decades believing himself beyond humbling. And yet he does not die on the forest floor. He does not die in the cart that carries him back to the Red Keep, swaying and groaning over every stone in the King's Road. He does not die through the first night, nor the second. He lingers, and in that lingering, something extraordinary becomes possible. What if a dying king is still a king? What if the crown has not yet passed, and the hand that once shattered a rebel prince's chest at the Trident still has strength enough to lift a quill, to press a seal, to change the shape of the world in the hours before darkness takes him? What if Robert Baratheon, in the last clear window of his consciousness, does something no one who knows him would predict? Something thoughtful, something honest, something that costs him everything he has left. The chamber is close and warm. Candles burn low. Grand Maester Pycelle has administered the milk of the poppy in careful measure, enough to dull the worst of the pain, but not enough, not yet, to pull the king beneath the surface where words no longer reach him. Robert lies against bolsters stained with the effort of simply breathing, his great barrel chest rising and falling, with a labor that sounds like something tearing, slowly, with each breath. The room smells of fever and tallow, and something sweeter beneath that. The herbs that cannot quite cover what a wound like this does to a man from the inside. He sends everyone out. That is where it begins. He sends Cersei out, and the look she gives the door as she closes it behind her is a calculation wearing the mask of concern. He sends the maesters out. He sends the guards to the far end of the corridor, and then he speaks a name that no one in that room expects, a name that carries dust and distance and the cold air of the north in its syllables. Jon Snow. The boy arrives not knowing what he is walking into. He is 17, lean in the way of young men who have trained hard and eaten sparingly, with the stark gray eyes and the dark, stark coloring that has always made him fit so easily into the family that claimed him. He has spent years at Castle Black in his thoughts already, resolving himself to a life at the wall, to black wool and cold stone, and the slow erasure of a name he never quite owned. He is not prepared for a dying king. He is not prepared for what the dying king knows. Robert looks at him for a long moment before speaking. He looks at him the way a man looks at a wound he has been avoiding, with recognition and with grief. What he says first is not political. It is not a decree, not a command, not the calculated speech of a king managing his succession. What he says first is Lyanna's name, and the way he says it, quietly, without armor, without the performance of old rage or old longing, tells Jon Snow that this is something different. This is confession. He tells the boy what Ned Stark has carried in silence for 17 years. He tells him about a tower in Dorne, about a promise extracted from a grieving brother, about a woman who died, not as the victim of a kidnapping, but as something more complicated than history has been permitted to record. He tells him the name Rhaegar Targaryen, with a bitterness that has gone concave over the years, bitterness pressed inward until it became something quieter and more corrosive, something like guilt, because Robert understands, in this room, in this hour, that the war he fought was built on a story only partially true, and that the boy standing before him is the living consequence of everything he refused to examine. Jon Snow does not speak. He does not finish any of the sentences that begin in his expression and stop before they reach his mouth. He stands very still, the way the Stark children have always learned to stand when the ground moves beneath them, rooted, composed, giving nothing to the air around them, while everything inside rearranges itself into a new configuration that will take years to fully understand. Robert reaches for the parchment that has been placed within arm's reach. His hand shakes, but his intention does not. He has already dictated the words to a scribe he trusts with the specific trust of a man who knows he is about to die, the trust that asks nothing of the future and everything of the present moment. The decree is not complex. It does not need to be. It names Jon Snow by his true name, the name his mother whispered in a tower while the world burned outside her window. Aegon Targaryen, true-born son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, legitimate claimant to the Iron Throne, acknowledged by Robert Baratheon, King of the Seven Kingdoms, in the last sovereign act of his reign. The seal presses into hot wax. It is done before Ned Stark arrives, and when Ned enters the chamber and sees both the boy and the document, when he reads the decree and then looks at Robert's face, he understands precisely what has been set in motion. Robert speaks with effort, each word measured against what breath remains. "You will take it to the council," he says, "before Joffrey sits, before Cersei moves." He does not finish the thought. He does not need to. Ned Stark already knows what is at stake, and already knows that knowing has never been the difficult part. Ned Stark carries the decree from Robert's chamber the way a man carries a torch into a powder room, with the full knowledge of what a single wrong step might ignite. The parchment is inside his doublet, pressed flat against his chest, and as he walks the corridors of the Red Keep in the hours before dawn, he can feel it there the way a wound makes itself known, not with pain exactly, but with a persistent, undeniable awareness that something has changed in the body and cannot be unchanged. He chooses the godswood because Cersei will come. She always comes when she senses the ground shifting beneath her. The godswood is the one place in the Red Keep that belongs to no particular faction, where the old gods listen and the new gods have no purchase, where a conversation can be had without every stone in the wall remembering it afterward. The heart tree stands witness, red-eyed and ancient, and Ned Stark positions himself beneath it the way a man positions himself before a battle, not with aggression, but with the particular stillness of someone who has already decided what he will and will not do. She comes in green silk, her hair immaculate even at this hour, because Cersei Lannister understands that appearance is the first weapon and the last. She reads what is offered to her. She reads it again, and then she looks at Ned Stark with those green eyes that have always known exactly how to calculate the distance between a threat and a promise. He tells her what he intends. He tells her that he will bring the decree before the small council, before Joffrey is named, that Robert's final command gives him the authority to do so, that the realm will hear the truth about the boy in the tower at Dragonstone, who shares a name with a dynasty. He tells her she may take her children and go south, across the narrow sea, anywhere the Queen's grace might carry them before the storm arrives. He offers this not out of mercy alone, but out of the cold arithmetic of a man who knows that a cornered lioness is more dangerous than a free one. She does not weep. She does not plead. She looks at the decree one final time, and something moves behind her eyes. Not fear exactly, but the recognition of a board position that has turned against her. And then she smiles, and the smile is its own kind of answer. "You are a good man, Lord Stark," she says. "Good men are so rarely prepared for what comes next." She does not finish the thought. She does not need to. By the time her footsteps fade from the godswood, she is already moving. Cersei Lannister has never once in her life waited for catastrophe to arrive. She has always ridden out to meet it. Jaime receives the message the way he receives most things from his sister, as a command dressed in the language of urgency, stripping away every other consideration until only the objective remains. He is riding within minutes of the first light, touching the towers of the Red Keep, the white cloak of the Kingsguard streaming behind him, his horse pushing hard through the narrow streets between the barracks and the Tower of the Hand. He does not yet know exactly what Ned Stark holds. He knows only that his sister used the word irreversible, and in 20 years of loving Cersei Lannister, he has learned that irreversible is the one word she deploys only when she means it. But there are other pieces moving across this board, and not all of them belong to House Lannister. Petyr Baelish watches the Red Keep the way a merchant watches a market in the moment before prices collapse, with the understanding that chaos is simply opportunity wearing a grimmer face. He has known for hours that something significant has shifted. He reads it in the way servants move, in the particular rhythm of boots on stone at an hour when boots should be still. He does not yet know the specific nature of the decree. He does not require specifics. What he requires is the shape of the disruption, and the shape he reads in the Red Keep's small hours tells him everything he needs. That legitimacy itself has become contested, and that contested legitimacy is the rarest and most exploitable commodity in any kingdom. If you're enjoying this alternate history of Westeros so far, please consider subscribing, because I upload new stories every single day. Now let's continue with the story. He finds Varys in a corridor that both men know is unobserved, and the conversation they have is conducted almost entirely in implication. Two men who have spent decades speaking in the spaces between words. Baelish suggests that the decree, whatever its contents, threatens to unsettle every succession arrangement in every great house simultaneously. He does not say this as a warning. He says it as an observation, the way a man notes the weather. Varys listens, and the silence that follows is the particular silence of a man filing information away in a place no one else can reach. Instability, Varys says quietly, has always been the most contagious of conditions. Baelish smiles. Then one ought to be very careful about who one stands next to. Meanwhile, in the Tower of the Hand, Ned Stark works with the precision of a man who understands that time is the resource he has least of. The decree goes into a locked chest, the key worn on a chain against his skin. He writes the letter himself, in his own hand, the words measured and deliberate, a request to the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, framed not as a petition, but as the transmission of a dead king's final sovereign command. He seals it with Robert's seal, which he still holds by right of his position, and he hands it to Jory Cassell in the last full dark before dawn breaks across the city. Jory asks no questions. He is a Cassell, and Cassells have served Starks long enough to understand that the questions can come later, when the writing is done and the message is delivered. He takes the sealed letter, tucks it inside his cloak, and mounts his horse in the quiet of the stable yard. where the straw is damp, and the only sound is the shifting of animals that sense the human urgency around them without understanding its source. Ned watches him go. He watches until the sound of hooves on stone fades into the pre-dawn silence, until there is nothing left of Jory Castle but the direction he was riding. North. Always north in the end. The letter is on its way to Castle Black, carrying the weight of a dead king's name and a living boy's future. And across the Red Keep, as the first gray light begins to find the highest towers, Jaime Lannister's horse reaches the outer approach of the Tower of the Hand, and slows and stops, and the Kingslayer sits in his saddle in the pale morning light, calculating not what he wants to do, but what he is going to have to do instead. The letter arrives at Castle Black on the 4th day, carried by a man who has not slept and barely eaten, and who smells of horse and hard road, and the particular desperation of someone who was told that speed mattered more than comfort. Jory Cassel dismounts in the yard of Castle Black as though his legs remember riding, even when the rest of him has forgotten everything else, and he asks for Jon Snow with a voice that does not invite delay. He is brought to him quickly. Men at the wall learn to read urgency in other men's faces. It is one of the first survival skills the cold teaches. Jon is with his uncle Benjen when the letter comes. They are standing near the edge of the yard, not quite talking, in the way of two people who have made a kind of peace with saying less than they feel. Benjen sees Jory first. He recognizes a Cassel, the way all men who have lived in Winterfell long enough learn to recognize them, by the set of the jaw, by the way they carry responsibility like a second cloak. His eyes move to Jon. He says nothing. He does not need to. Jon takes the letter. He breaks the seal slowly, and then he reads it. There are moments in a man's life that do not announce themselves as they arrive. They carry no ceremony. The world does not stop its noise. Somewhere above, a crow calls out across the cold gray sky. Somewhere behind, two men are arguing about the lateness of a supply wagon, and Jon Snow reads the words his father wrote. His father, because whatever else is true, Ned Stark is the man who raised him, and that fact does not dissolve because another truth has arrived to complicate it, and the yard of Castle Black shrinks to the size of a single page held in two careful hands. He reads it twice. He reads it a third time. He does not speak. Benjen watches him. Benjen, who has lived at the edge of the world for years, who chose duty the way other men choose exile, who knows the Stark face in every form it takes. Benjen watches his nephew's expression move through something that has no single name. Not shock, exactly. Not grief, exactly. Something older than both. Recognition, perhaps, of a shape that was always there in the dark, that the hand reached for without knowing what it was reaching for. Jon looks up. His voice, when it comes, is very quiet. He says that it is not possible. He says this, not as a man who believes it is impossible, but as a man who needs to hear himself say it before he can accept that it is not. Benjen places a hand on his shoulder, and that hand says more than words could manage. It says, I suspected. It says, Ned never told me, but I suspected. It says, I am sorry it took this long and this much for the truth to come to you. They find Maester Aemon before nightfall. The old man sits in his chambers in the way he always sits, perfectly still, perfectly patient, like a man who has long since made his peace with time and simply waits for it to finish its business. He is told the substance of the letter. He is told who Jon is. He is told what the dead king decreed, and in the silence that follows, Aemon Targaryen, last Targaryen of the Night's Watch, last living thread of a dynasty that burned itself to nothing, does something that surprises the room. He smiles. It is small, and it is brief, and it carries the weight of 100 years of watching, but it is a smile nonetheless. He says that he always wondered. He says that Ned Stark was a terrible liar, which in most men is a flaw, but in Ned Stark was very nearly the only vanity he allowed himself. He says that a man who lies badly usually has something worth protecting. Then he is quiet for a moment, and when he speaks again, the smile is gone, and what remains is something harder and more necessary. He says that Jon must go. Jon says his vows. He says them with the weight of a man who took them seriously, which is the only way Jon Snow has ever done anything. He says that he swore before gods and men. He says that the Night's Watch does not release its brothers because kings are inconvenient. Aemon is unmoved, not unkindly unmoved, unmoved the way deep stone is unmoved, the way something that has stood a very long time learns to stand. He tells Jon what he has never told another living soul in the plainness that he tells him now. He says that he too had a choice. He says that when the ravens came, and the news came, and the world was calling for a Targaryen, he stayed. He stayed because he believed the wall was more important than the throne, and he has never been certain, in all the years since, whether he was right. He says, "Do not let me be your reason for staying. Do not honor my doubt by repeating it." The silence that follows is the kind that fills a room completely. Jon leaves before dawn. He does not say many goodbyes. The ones he says are brief and necessary and mean more for their brevity. He takes Longclaw. He takes nothing else that did not already belong to him. In the dark of the yard, Ghost materializes from the shadows the way Ghost always does, silently, as though the great white direwolf simply decides to be where Jon is, and the space between them closes without the formality of movement. Jory Cassell is already mounted. The escort waits. 4 rangers, seasoned men, men who understand that they are accompanying something significant without having been told precisely what. They sit their horses with the patience of men who have ridden difficult roads before and expect to ride them again. Jon mounts. He looks back once at the wall, rising black and absolute and ancient into the last of the night sky, a thing that has stood since before the names he is now carrying existed in the world. He looks at it the way a man looks at something he built with his own hands when he is not certain he will see it again. Then he turns his horse south. Ghost moves with him, keeping pace without effort, a silent white shape against the dark road. The gate closes behind them with the dull finality of heavy timber, and the sound of it carries up and out and dissolves into the cold air of the gift. And then there is only the sound of hooves and breathing and the particular quiet that exists at the edge of the world before the world has fully woken. Somewhere in the middle of that procession, riding between Jory at the front and the rangers at the rear, Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen, though the name still fits him the way a borrowed coat fits, a little wrong across the shoulders, turns the facts over in his mind, the way a man turns a stone he has just pulled from deep earth, examining each face of it in turn, not yet certain what he is holding, but understanding with a cold and growing clarity that it is heavier than it looks. The name is a stone, the crown is a stone, the dead king's decree is a stone, and somewhere far to the south, In a city full of people who do not yet know what is riding toward them, the game is already being played with pieces that do not yet know they are pieces. Except one. Somewhere in the Tower of the Hand, Eddard Stark is already calculating the next move. Because the letter has been sent, the boy is riding, and the thing that has been set in motion cannot be unset. And Ned Stark, who hates this game more than almost any man alive, has just made the most consequential opening move of his life. And he is not the only one watching the board. The sealed letter sits at the center of the table like a wound. Eddard Stark sets it down without ceremony, without preamble, without the kind of theatrical flourish that this room, full of men who traffic in performance, might have expected from a man less constitutionally opposed to theater. He simply places it there, on the long table in the Tower of the Hand, in the full session of the small council, and steps back. The wax seal is dark red. The impression is the stag of House Baratheon, pressed deep and clean. Robert's seal, Robert's hand, Robert's final, irrevocable word. Grand Maester Pycelle is asked to confirm it. He takes the letter with the careful reverence of a man who understands that the object he is holding is not paper, but a detonation with a slow fuse. He examines the seal for a long time, longer than he needs to. Then he nods and says the words that cannot be unsaid. The seal is genuine. The hand is the king's. The document is lawful. And in that moment, the room does not erupt immediately. There is a half-breath of silence, the kind that precedes thunder, and then it erupts. Littlefinger speaks first, because Littlefinger always speaks first when chaos is the instrument he intends to play. His voice is measured, almost amused, carrying that particular quality of a man who has already decided on his position and is now simply constructing the architecture of argument around it. A dying king's fever dream, he says. The legal standing of a document produced in the final hours of a man whose cups had been filled more often than his judgment lately. What lord in the realm would honor it? What court would enforce it? He does not shout. Petyr Baelish never shouts. He makes shouting unnecessary by making his quiet words do more damage than shouting ever could. Cersei says nothing yet. This is the tell. Cersei in fury is a woman who speaks. Cersei calculating is a woman who watches, who waits, who maps the room with her eyes, the way a general maps a field before committing cavalry. She watches Littlefinger. She watches Pycelle. She watches Ned. And her silence is not stillness. It is the stillness of something about to move very fast. And then Varys speaks. This is the pivot. This is the moment that will be discussed. If the world that follows allows for the luxury of retrospection, as the instant the board changed its entire geometry, Varys speaks softly, as he always does, in that tone that suggests he is merely thinking aloud, merely offering a small and perhaps inconsequential observation to minds more powerful than his own. He has, he says, received intelligence, recent intelligence, very carefully verified, pertaining to the nature of the marriage between Prince Rhaegar Targaryen and the Lady Lyanna Stark of Winterfell. He pauses, not for effect, or not only for effect. He pauses because he understands that what he is about to say will not be heard the same way twice. Once it exists in the air of this room, it changes the air of every room beyond it, permanently and without remedy. The marriage was lawful, a septon, a ceremony, Dorne, witnesses who are still alive and can be produced. The boy riding south is not a bastard. The boy riding south is not merely Targaryen. The boy riding south is trueborn, legitimate, the son of a crown prince and a lawfully wedded wife, which means that whatever Joffrey's claim may rest on, Jon Snow's claim, Aegon Targaryen's claim, rests on bedrock older and harder and deeper than any of theirs. Littlefinger's amusement does not vanish. It transforms. It becomes something cooler, more watchful, recalibrating. A man like Petyr Baelish does not lose his composure, because his composure is not a natural thing. It is a constructed thing, a fortress he has built around himself through decades of operating in rooms where composure was the only armor available to a man, without blood or banners. But the fortress is working harder than it usually works. This is visible to anyone watching closely enough. Ned Stark is watching closely enough. Cersei speaks now. She speaks with the controlled fury of someone who has just seen a door she believed was locked swing open, and her words are precise and dangerous and aimed at Varys first, then at Ned, questioning the provenance of the intelligence, questioning the timing, questioning everything except the seal, because Pycelle has already made the seal unquestionable, and she is too intelligent to fight on ground she cannot hold. But the argument she is making, even as she makes it, is losing its shape. The logic of it is sound, but the mathematics are not, and somewhere beneath the fury, Cersei Lannister is already thinking past this room, past this table, past this morning. She is thinking about what needs to be moved, and where, and how quickly. Ned Stark invokes the precedent. He has prepared for this. Of course he has prepared for this. Ned Stark is not a man of improvisation. He is a man of preparation, of deliberate and careful architecture, of knowing exactly what legal instrument he intends to use before he walks into the room where he will need it. The precedent is old. It requires a great council. It requires the great lords of the realm to convene and adjudicate competing claims before a coronation can proceed. It has not been invoked in generations. It is, nonetheless, the law. Joffrey will not be crowned today. The silence that follows this declaration is of a different quality than the silence before. That silence was anticipation. This silence is reckoning. Every person in this room understands what a great council means. It means time. It means lords traveling from every corner of the realm. It means weeks at minimum, and weeks are long enough for a rider from the north to reach King's Landing, long enough for facts to be confirmed and documents to be examined, and a young man with a Targaryen face to stand in a hall full of lords and make them understand what they are looking at. Littlefinger's eyes move to Ned's face. They stay there. He is reading something, calculating something, and what he is calculating is not whether Ned can be stopped. He is calculating whether Ned can be used or redirected, or whether the situation requires an entirely different approach from the one he had anticipated this morning when he walked into this room with Joffrey's coronation as a fixed point on the horizon. The fixed point is no longer fixed. A raven will need to be sent. Many ravens. Ned knows this. The moment he invoked the Great Council, he lit a signal fire visible from every castle in the realm. Every lord will know within a fortnight that the succession is in dispute, that there is a Targaryen claimant, that the crown is not settled. Some will smell opportunity. Some will begin moving pieces of their own before the full dimensions of the situation are even clear to them. The realm is a dry field, and this morning, Ned Stark held a torch to it deliberately, carefully, because the alternative was to let Joffrey be crowned and watch every option close like doors swinging shut one after another. And Ned Stark, who hates this game, who has always hated this game, has nonetheless played it this morning with a precision that would have surprised men who thought they knew him. Varys watches the room. Varys always watches the room. What he sees satisfies him in the particular way that satisfying outcomes satisfy men who planned for them, not with surprise, but with the quiet confirmation of a hypothesis. He produced his intelligence today for reasons that have very little to do with loyalty to any particular claimant, and everything to do with the balance of forces, the architecture of power, the understanding that a legitimate Targaryen changes the game so completely that every previous calculation must be scrapped and rebuilt from its foundations. He is already rebuilding. He has been rebuilding for longer than anyone in this room suspects. Cersei's hand on the table is still, too still. She is deciding something. And Ned, standing at the head of the table, has bought exactly what he needed to buy, time, and has paid for it in the only currency available to him, which is the certainty that every enemy he has in this city now knows exactly what he is doing and will spend every hour between now and the Great Council finding ways to stop him. He understands this. He has accepted this. He reaches out and picks up Robert's letter from the center of the table, folds it once, and places it inside his coat, close to his chest, and says, quietly, that the ravens will go out before nightfall. Littlefinger watches him do it, and for just a moment, before the mask reassembles itself into its usual pleasant architecture, something moves across Petyr Baelish's face that is not quite anger and not quite admiration. It is the expression of a man revising, rapidly, the map he thought he had been reading, because the territory has just revealed a feature that was not on any version of the map he owned. He turns away. He needs to think. He needs to move certain conversations forward, and others sideways, and one or two into shadow entirely, before the next session of this council, before the ravens fly, before the boy from the north crosses whatever road or river currently separates him from the city that does not yet know his name. He does not look back at Ned Stark as he leaves the room. He does not need to. He already knows where Ned Stark will be. What he does not yet know, what is keeping the gears of that precise and tireless mind turning as he moves through the corridor beyond, is who else has already been told, and when the First Lord beyond these walls received word, and whether the great council Ned Stark has just called is going to resemble the instrument of order Ned intends it to be, or something altogether less manageable, less predictable, less controllable than that. Because a great council is, among other things, an invitation, and not every lord who accepts an invitation arrives with the host's intentions in mind. Cersei Lannister does not grieve. She calculates. And on the night the gold cloaks move through the shadows of the Red Keep toward the Tower of the Hand, she is standing at her window with her arms folded across her chest, watching the courtyard below with the patient stillness of a woman who has already decided that patience is the only form of power left to her. Janos Slynt has his orders. They are not complicated orders. They do not require nuance. What they require is speed and darkness and enough swords to overwhelm a household guard that was never designed for war inside the walls of a king's own city. What if the Lannisters had moved sooner? What if they had moved before Ned Stark's ravens flew, before his allies inside the keep had time to position themselves in doorways and along staircases, before the loyal men of Winterfell had thought to sleep in shifts with their boots already on. It would have been cleaner. It would have been finished. But the Goldcloaks move when Cersei tells them to move, and Cersei does not move until she is certain, and certainty costs time. And time, on this particular night, is the one currency she does not have enough of. The attack begins at the second hour past midnight. It is not clean. It is not quick. The Stark household guards, 30 men who have eaten northern cold and breathed northern wind and served a man who trained them, not merely for ceremony, but for the weight of real violence. They do not simply fall. 3 of Slint's men go down before the corridor is secured. Ned Stark takes a blade across the thigh, deep enough to pull him from his feet, not deep enough to kill him. That distinction is intentional. Cersei wants him alive. A dead Ned Stark is a martyr. A living Ned Stark in a cell beneath the Red Keep is a lever. She understands leverage. She was raised in a house that invented it. But 7 men escape, 7 Stark guards who go out through windows and over walls, and through a servant's passage that Cersei's intelligence had simply failed to account for. 7 men on 7 horses riding north before dawn breaks over Blackwater Bay. She will not learn this until morning. She will stand very still when she does. The rider reaches Moat Cailin before the week is out, then another, then the third, each one carrying a variation of the same message. The Lord of Winterfell is taken, the hand of the king is in chains, and a boy rides south on the King's Road, who carries in his blood a claim that could unmake every calculation the great houses have spent 17 years building on top of Robert Baratheon's throne. Robb Stark reads the first letter in the yard at Winterfell, in the gray northern light, with Greatjon Umber standing 6 feet away watching his face. Robb does not let his face say everything. He has been learning that. He has been practicing it. He folds the letter with careful, deliberate hands and he says, quietly, with the kind of quiet that carries farther than shouting, that he wants his bannermen assembled in 3 days. Not a season, not a fortnight, 3 days. What is different here? What separates this moment from the canon catastrophe of it is the clarity of purpose. In another telling, Robb Stark marches south for vengeance, for honor, for a father rotting in a dungeon beneath a city that hates his name. And those are real reasons. Those are reasons that move armies, but they are not reasons that build kingdoms, and they are not reasons that hold alliances together across the brutal practical weight of a long campaign. Here, Robb Stark has something else. He has Jon. He has a cousin, a brother in all the ways that matter, riding south as a Targaryen claimant with a legitimate path to the Iron Throne. And if Robb's army marches not merely to free Ned, but to clear that path, then the war he is about to fight is not a rebellion. It is the opening movement of a restoration. That is a different thing entirely. A different thing that the Lords of the North feel differently when they hear it. The Karstarks and the Mormonts and the Glovers, they ride for Ned Stark because honor demands it. But they march with purpose because the Stark cause has been given, for the first time, a shape that extends beyond grief. Jaime Lannister rides south on the King's Road with 400 cavalry and the expression of a man executing a clean tactical problem. He does not doubt the outcome. He is the finest sword in Westeros, and Jon Snow, whatever name he rides under now, is a boy of 16 with a ranging party and no infantry. The arithmetic is not complicated. Intercept the column before it reaches the capital. Remove the Targaryen claim before the Great Council convenes. Cersei's letter was brief. His orders are simple. He understands that simplicity is sometimes the most dangerous quality a set of orders can possess, because simple orders do not account for complications, and complications, on the King's Road in the early hours before a collision neither side has yet mapped, have a way of arriving with their own cavalry. The first scout Jon's party sends back does not return. The second scout returns pale and fast, and saying only one word before he has fully reined his horse. One word, and every rider in Jon's party reaches for steel. The word is Lannister. The word hangs in the cold morning air like smoke from a fire that has not yet been seen. Lannister. One word, and the arithmetic that Jaime had calculated so cleanly on his side of the board now lands on Jon's side of it with all its weight. 400 cavalry against a ranging party of 11. The road ahead narrows where the Crossroads Inn sits squat and gray against the tree line, and Jory Castle is already pulling riders into a tighter formation without being asked, because Jory has been in enough bad terrain to know that bad terrain chosen well is worth 50 swords chosen poorly. Jon does not panic. This is the first thing worth noting. He is 16 years old, and the road ahead is sealed by golden cloaks and Lannister crimson, and he does not panic. Ned Stark drilled something into his son in those gray Winterfell yards that went deeper than footwork and guard positions. He drilled the habit of stillness, the understanding that the moment panic enters a man's body, the fight is already half lost before the first blade clears a scabbard. Jon clears his scabbard. He is still. Jaime arrives the way great swordsmen always arrive, without hurry, because hurry implies doubt, and Jaime Lannister has not doubted himself with a sword in his hand since he was old enough to understand what a sword was for. He rides to the front of his column and he looks at the 11 riders blocking the road before him, the way a stonemason looks at a wall he has been commissioned to take down, professionally, without malice. The malice is Cersei's. Jaime has only the commission. What if the simplest orders, as Jaime himself had almost understood on the road south, carry within them the seeds of their own undoing? What if clean arithmetic, applied to a problem that contains a variable no one has accounted for, produces not a clean solution, but a proof that something has been missed? The variable is not Jon's sword arm, though that too will matter before the morning is done. The variable is ghost, white and vast and utterly silent, already moving through the tree line to the east of the road with a hunter's patience, waiting for the moment that only a direwolf understands how to read. Jaime offers terms. He is a knight, and this is procedure. And procedure, even here, matters to him in ways that cannot be fully explained by calculation alone. He asks Jon to yield. He frames it as mercy. He is not wrong that it would be mercy. He is simply wrong to expect the answer he receives. Jon says no. He does not qualify it. He does not explain himself or make demands or request safe passage or invoke his father's name or Robert's proclamation. He says no with the flat finality of a man who has already moved past the moment of decision and is standing on the other side of it. Jaime studies him for a moment. Something shifts behind those green eyes. Not respect, not yet, but the first faint adjustment a chess player makes when a piece moves in a direction the opening did not predict. The fighting begins the way fighting always begins at close quarters, suddenly, and from several directions at once. Jory takes the eastern flank with 4 rangers and a discipline that turns 11 men briefly into something that feels like more. They do not fight to win against 400. They fight to survive long enough for something else to happen. And survival, executed with precision, has its own momentum. 2 Lannister riders go down in the first exchange. 3 more find their horses too tightly bunched to maneuver on the narrow road. And tight horses on a narrow road are not 400 cavalry anymore. They are a problem of geometry masquerading as an army. Jaime comes for Jon directly. Of course he does. Remove the head and the body stops. It is still clean arithmetic, still simple, still the execution of a commission. His first 3 strokes are masterwork, precise, economical, each one designed not merely to wound, but to test, to map the shape of what he is fighting, to find the weakness that will end this before it costs him anything further. Jon meets all 3, not cleanly, not with Jaime's elegance, but he meets them with something harder to account for than elegance. He meets them with the absolute refusal to be moved. The 4th stroke finds a gap. Jon takes the cut across his left forearm and keeps his feet, and Jaime is already reading the end of the sentence when Ghost comes out of the tree line. Not at Jon, at Jaime's horse. What if the finest sword in Westeros becomes, in a single moment, a man on foot, in close terrain, with his formation in chaos behind him? What if the variable, no order accounted for, weighs 12 stone and carries no banner and owes loyalty to nothing except blood? The horse goes sideways and screaming, and Jaime, who is exceptional, keeps his balance. But balance is not position, and position on this road has already shifted past the point where 400 cavalry can reassemble into a clean solution before Jory's remaining rangers close the gap from behind. Jaime Lannister stands in the road, with his sword still in his hand, and the arithmetic no longer in his favor. He understands what has happened. He is too intelligent not to. He looks at Jon Snow, at the blood on his arm and the stillness that has not left him, and he makes the calculation one final time. There is no version of this next exchange that does not cost him more than surrender. He lowers the sword. The word he speaks is brief: yield. One word, returned like a mirror held up to the morning. Jon's rangers form a ring around the Kingslayer before the echo of it has left the air, and somewhere to the north, without any rider yet dispatched to carry the news, the 7 kingdoms are about to learn what happens when simple orders meet a variable no one thought to name. The ravens are already being written. The lords who kept their riders saddled and their oaths unspoken are already reaching for their seals. And Jon Snow, bleeding quietly on the King's Road with Jaime Lannister's sword in the hands of one of Jory's rangers, looks south toward King's Landing and understands that the trial is over, but the judgment has not yet been delivered, and that whatever the Great Council makes of this morning, he must arrive there before the story of it does. The Raven reaches Sunspear 3 days before the news of Jaime Lannister's surrender reaches anyone else. That is Varys's gift, not information itself, but the timing of it. Doran Martell sits in his solar with the windows open to the evening desert air, the warmth of it pressing gently against his face, and he reads the letter twice. Then he reads it a 3rd time, not because he doubts its contents, but because he is a man who has learned to distrust the arrival of everything he has waited for. What he holds in his hands is a copy of the marriage record from the sept at the Tower of Joy, witnessed by a septon long dead and authenticated through channels that Varys alone could have navigated. Rhaegar Targaryen, Lyanna Stark, bound before the gods in the sight of witnesses. Legitimate. Every rumor Doran has carried in his chest for 17 years, folded and refolded, until it had worn thin at the creases, is suddenly made solid. He does not call for wine. He does not call for his maester. He sits for a long moment in the last amber light of the Dornish evening, and he allows himself to feel the full weight of what this means. Not for the realm, not yet, but for Elia, for her children, for the story that was told about their deaths, and the men who were allowed to go on living in comfort after telling it. The Lannisters did not simply murder a princess and her children. They murdered the truth about who those children were. And the man who gave the order sat on the Iron Throne and was called the greatest king the realm had seen since Jaehaerys. And Tywin Lannister was permitted to return to Casterly Rock and be called honorable. Doran Martell has swallowed 17 years of that. He is finished swallowing. He writes the reply himself, in his own hand, without summoning a scribe. Dorne pledges its spears, its ships, and its full strength to the rightful king. He signs it with the full formal seal of House Martell, the sun and spear, ancient and unambiguous, and he calls for his brother before the wax has cooled. Oberyn does not need to be told twice. He has never needed to be told anything twice, and in this case, he does not need to be told at all. He reads the letter over Doran's shoulder, and he laughs. Not the cruel laugh of a man who has won something, but the low, private laugh of a man who has waited so long for a door to open that he had begun to suspect the room behind it did not exist. It exists. He is already calling for his horse. He rides north with a column of Dornish spears at his back, through the high passes and the rocky scrubland, through the long dry corridors that connect the south of the continent to the Crownlands. He rides fast, and he does not stop to rest more than the horses require. Word has already traveled. The Kingslayer taken, Jon Snow moving south, something irreversible beginning in the bones of the realm. And Oberyn Martell has no intention of arriving after the opening moves have been played. He intends to be a move himself. They meet Jon's column on a narrow road 2 days west of the Crownlands, in the gray morning light before the sun has fully committed to the sky. The Dornish riders emerge from a tree line in disciplined formation, and there is a moment, brief, electric, where hands move toward hilts on both sides. Then Oberyn rides forward alone, his horse moving at an unhurried walk that is somehow louder for its slowness, and he stops 12 feet from Jon Snow and looks at him with the direct, appraising gaze of a man who has killed more people than he can remember and feared fewer of them than he can count. Jon meets the look without flinching. He is still bandaged from the King's Road. He is still wearing the same dust as the road itself. He does not look like a king. He looks like a man who has been tested recently and has not yet decided how he feels about having passed. Oberyn swings down from his horse. He is not a man who kneels easily. Everyone who has ever met him understands this. And so the moment when he goes to one knee in the Dornish fashion carries a weight that would have been invisible from any lesser man. The soldiers on both sides watch. Every watching lord and knight and common rider understands that the calculation being performed in front of them has just produced a result, and that result is irreversible. "Your Grace," Oberyn says, "House Martell rides with the blood of the dragon." Dorne remembers Elia. The silence that follows is not empty. It is full of every oath not yet spoken, every banner not yet raised, every lord who has spent weeks keeping his riders saddled, and his seals warm, and his options open. The Dornish spears behind Oberyn number in the thousands. Jon looks at them, and then he looks down at the man kneeling before him, and something in his expression shifts, not into triumph, but into something older and harder than triumph. Recognition, perhaps. The understanding that this war has just acquired a shape. In King's Landing, the first raven from the south arrives before midday. Cersei reads it standing, which is how she always reads bad news, as though sitting would make it more true. The words are plain. Dorne has declared. She stands at the window above the city for a long moment, watching the rooftops she has always understood as hers, and then she calls for her own maester. The letter she dictates is not a request. There are no longer requests in what she writes to Casterly Rock. There is only the word March, and the full Lannister name behind it, and the understanding that whatever this began as, it is no longer a dispute over succession. It is a war. And the trap that she has only just realized has been building around her is already drawing closed from the south and the north both, with Jon Snow bleeding quietly at the junction of it all, standing still in the eye of something she can no longer stop. The ravens go out. The Lannister war machine begins, slowly and then all at once, to move. The roads south of King's Landing fill before dawn, not with soldiers alone, though soldiers there are, the Stark escort riding in tight formation, gray cloaks bearing the direwolf, disciplined and quiet in the way of men who have already decided they will not retreat, and alongside them the Dornish vanguard, sun-scorched and proud, moving with a particular looseness in the saddle that speaks of absolute confidence in their position. But between these two forces, and around them, and trailing behind them for a mile and more, there are others, common people, small folk from the villages along the King's Road who have heard the name Targaryen carried on the wind and made their own calculations about which side of a gate they wish to be standing on when history settles its accounts. They carry nothing that could be called a weapon. They carry the name. That is enough. Jon rides near the front, but not at it. He has learned, in these last days, that a banner is most powerful when it does not appear to be straining. The claim does not press forward. The claim arrives. There is a difference, and the men riding beside him understand it, even if none of them have found the words for it yet. The walls of King's Landing appear on the horizon in the blue hour before full morning light, gray and immense and ancient, and for a long moment the entire column simply looks at them. No orders are given, no horns sound. The city sees the army before the army speaks, and that, too, is by design. In the north, Robb Stark's forces have been moving since the third hour of the night. He pressed them hard, and they did not complain, because the men of the north do not complain about cold or darkness or hard marching, and because every one of them knows what is in those black cells beneath the Red Keep, what has been in those cells for months now. The name Eddard Stark is not spoken aloud as they march, but it is present in every footfall on the frozen ground, in every exhaled breath that fogs in the pre-dawn air. The Northern Army does not move like men executing a military maneuver. It moves like something owed. The gold cloaks on the northern walls see them first. A sergeant named Aller Deem, whose loyalty has always been a practical rather than a principled thing, looks out from the ramparts and performs, in the space of perhaps 4 seconds, the kind of arithmetic that decides the fates of cities. He counts the Stark banners. He estimates the column's depth. He thinks of the message that has been passed quietly among the watch these last 2 days, the one that began circulating the morning after the first raven arrived from Dorne. The message about a boy named Aegon, about a marriage conducted in secret, about a king who died, having written something in his final hours that the queen had tried very hard to ensure no one ever read. He thinks about these things, and then he steps down from the ramparts and walks to find his captain. Varys has been awake for 36 hours. He does not show it. He moves through the servant passages beneath the Red Keep with his customary glide, his robes whispering against stone, and the men he speaks to are never the great lords, never the names anyone would recognize. They are the keeper of the Mudgate's inner mechanisms. They are the second in command of the watch rotation at the Dragon Gate. They are, each of them, men who have been quietly cultivated for years against the possibility of precisely this morning. He does not threaten them. He does not bribe them, not with gold at least. He offers them something more durable than gold. He offers them the version of this story in which they are men who recognized the truth and acted accordingly, rather than men who died protecting a lie. It is a remarkably persuasive offer. It requires very little repetition. The Dragon Gate opens before the 9th hour of the morning, not dramatically. There is no great creak of ancient hinges, no theatrical moment of surrender. It simply opens, the way a door opens when the person holding it from the other side decides, quite calmly, that they are finished holding it. Jon's column moves through slowly, and the gold cloaks who remain at their posts do not raise their spears. They step aside. Some of them remove their helms. The gesture is small, and it is enormous. The city does not burn. That is the thing that will be told about this day in all the years that follow. That King's Landing fell without the fire, without the sack, without the particular horror that cities carry in their oldest memories. The small folks stay in their homes and listen, and what they hear is not screaming, but the slow, organized sound of a transfer of power moving through the streets like weather. Cersei Lannister is found in the Tower of the Hand with her children. She does not run. Running was never something she permitted herself, even now, even in this. She is placed under guard by men wearing gray, and the look she gives them is one of extraordinary contempt wrapped around something smaller and quieter that might, in another woman, be called despair. The black cells are cold and very dark, and the man inside the largest of them has grown so thin that the guards who open his door do not immediately recognize him. He stands when the torchlight comes in, because even now, even diminished to almost nothing, Eddard Stark stands when people enter a room. He shades his eyes against the brightness. He says nothing yet. He waits, the way he has always waited, not passively, but with an enormous, concentrated patience, as though stillness itself is a form of will. It takes 2 hours to bring him, cleaned and dressed in whatever borrowed clothes can be found, to the throne room. He walks the distance without assistance, though those who escort him walk close enough to catch him if his legs decide otherwise. They do not need to. He walks. The throne room is full. Every lord who has ridden with the column, every Dornish captain, every northern knight who entered the city in those first orderly hours, they are all there, arranged in the way that men arrange themselves when they understand they are witnessing something that will be retold. Jon stands before the Iron Throne, but not on the steps of it, not yet. He stands on the floor, at the level of the assembled lords, and he watches the doors. Ned Stark walks in and stops. Across the length of that vast room, they look at each other, the man who raised him and the boy he raised, and the silence that falls is not empty. It is the fullest kind of silence, the kind that is only possible when everything that might be said is already understood between two people before any word is spoken. There are tears in Ned Stark's eyes. He does not wipe them. Then, slowly, with a deliberateness that makes the act feel carved rather than performed, Eddard Stark goes to his knee. On the stone floor of the throne room that once belonged to the dynasty he served and then helped overthrow, he kneels before the son of his sister, before the last blood of the dragon, before the name on Robert Baratheon's final decree. His voice is roughened by months of cold and thirst and silence, but it carries. He says the name, not Jon, the other name, the true name, spoken publicly for the first time, filling the room from the rafters to the stones. The assembled lords are very still. Then, one by one, and then in clusters, and then all together, they follow him down. In the gallery above, Varys watches this without expression. He has been watching for a very long time, moving pieces across distances too vast for most men to hold in their minds at once. And what he feels now is not satisfaction exactly. Satisfaction implies the work is finished. What he feels is the particular clarity that comes when the board reaches a configuration that was always possible, that he always believed was possible, and that the board has nonetheless taken 15 years to achieve. He permits himself one slow breath. Then he turns, because there are letters to be written and ravens to be sent, and the lords of the Reach have not yet declared, and somewhere to the west, the Lannister war machine has already begun to move. The Iron Throne is not beautiful. This is the first thing that strikes those who have never stood before it. Not its size, not its strangeness, but its deliberate ugliness. The way Aegon the Conqueror chose to make a seat of power from the weapons of the defeated, rather than from gold, or carved marble, or the dignified woods of distant lands. 1,000 swords, melted and beaten and twisted into something that was never meant to be comfortable, because Aegon understood something that softer kings forgot, that power should cost the one who holds it, that a throne which cuts its occupant is a throne that demands attention, demands presence, demands that the one seated upon it never forget, not for a single drowsing moment, what they are doing and why. Jon Snow understands this now. He has understood it for perhaps 30 seconds, which is how long he has been seated upon it, and already the understanding has settled into him, like cold water finding the lowest ground. The hall is vast, and the hall is watching. Every lord who bent the knee an hour ago remains, because none of them dare to leave, and because all of them want to see what happens next. What happens next is the question that has governed every whispered conversation in every solar and corridor of the Red Keep since the gates opened. What happens to the prisoners? What happens to the children? What happens to Cersei Lannister, who sat in these very halls for 17 years as queen, and who is now held in a tower room with 2 guards at her door and no visitors permitted, and no word sent to her regarding her fate? What happens to Joffrey? He is brought in first. This is deliberate. Jon has chosen the order carefully, working through it the night before with Ned Stark, who said little but listened to everything, and with Doran Martell, who said a great deal and whose counsel carried the particular precision of a man who has spent 2 decades studying patience as a form of warfare. The Dornish want blood. They have always wanted blood. Elia Martell's blood soaked into the stones of this very city, and Doran Martell has not forgotten a single drop of it, and he carries that memory the way other men carry blades, close to the body, always within reach. He made his position known clearly. He does not pretend otherwise. The children are Lannister blood, and the Lannisters destroyed his sister, and justice has waited long enough. Jon listened. He thanked him. Then he made his own decision. Joffrey enters the throne room, and he is not the boy who terrorized a court or paraded cruelty as a form of entertainment. He is simply a boy, 15 years old, fair-haired and pale-faced, and clearly terrified in the way that very proud people become terrified when pride is no longer available to them as armor. He has been told, in formal language, before witnesses, that the bastardy finding is official and on the record. He is not Joffrey Baratheon. He is not Joffrey of House Lannister. He is Joffrey Waters, and the name lands on him in the throne room like a stone dropped from a height, visible in the way his jaw tightens, and his eyes move, and his hands, clasped before him, press together hard enough to whiten the knuckles. Jon watches this. He does not look away. He speaks then, from the throne, and his voice carries the same roughness it held when he spoke his own name an hour before. But there is something beneath the roughness now, a steadiness that does not waver. He says that Joffrey Waters will not be executed. He says that Myrcella and Tommen, who are younger still and knew nothing of their parentage and committed no crime under any law, will not be executed. He says they will be wards of the crown, housed, fed, educated, kept safe, and kept, it goes without saying, where they can be watched. A mercy so complete that several of the assembled lords exchange glances, recalibrating. A mercy that costs Jon nothing in the material sense and everything in the political one, because Doran Martell's expression does not soften, and the Dornish delegation behind him goes very still, and that stillness carries weight. But the moderate lords, the ones who bent the knee with relief rather than conviction, who feared what a Targaryen restoration might mean for the stability of their own holdings, those lords exhale. Quietly, without ceremony, they exhale, and Jon sees it. He is looking for it. He has learned, somewhere in the months between the wall and this hall, to read a room the way a ranger reads terrain, not for what is visible on the surface, but for what the surface conceals, what lies beneath, what moves underneath the stillness. Cersei is brought before him in the afternoon, when the hall has thinned and only the necessary witnesses remain. She enters as a queen might enter even in defeat, chin elevated and eyes moving across the room with the habitual calculation of a woman who has spent her entire adult life managing every variable in her immediate environment. She looks at the throne. She looks at the man seated on it. Something passes across her face that is not quite grief, and not quite rage, and not quite recognition, but contains elements of all three. Jon speaks her sentence without preamble. Exile across the narrow sea. One ship. No gold, no titles, no return. Her life, which is more than her crimes warrant, and both of them know it. She says nothing. For a long moment, she says absolutely nothing, and the silence in the room is the kind that presses against the ears. Then Jaime is brought in. And this is where the real calculation reveals itself, because Jaime Lannister is not Cersei. He has never been Cersei. He has always been something more dangerous and more complicated, a man capable of genuine loyalty, who chose to spend that loyalty poorly, and who has lived for years in the gap between who he is and who he allowed himself to become. Jon looks at him and offers him the terms plainly. A public confession, the truth, on the record, in his own voice, in exchange for his freedom and his life, and the assurance that the children will be treated well. Refusing means death, and refusing means the children carry the shame without the accompanying mercy of context. Jaime's jaw works. His eyes move to Cersei, and hers move to him, and something passes between them that has no name in any language. The compressed communication of two people who have known each other since before they knew anything else. He does not look away from her when he speaks. He says he will do it. He says it quietly, without drama, with the flat affect of a man who has already paid several prices he never expected to survive, and is simply paying another. Cersei closes her eyes. Outside the throne room, in the passage that runs along the eastern gallery, Ned Stark stands with his hands at his sides and listens to the muffled sound of what is happening within. He does not go in. He was not asked to, and he would not intrude. This is Jon's work now. This has always been going to be Jon's work, and Ned has understood for some time that his own role in this story reached its conclusion the moment his son, his nephew, the correction still strange in his mind, still requiring conscious application, sat down on that throne and held its cost without flinching. He is proud. The pride is uncomplicated, and it is enormous, and it sits in his chest like something warm, which is not a sensation Ned Stark has had cause to experience with any frequency these past years. But there is something else too, something quieter, something at the edges, because the Lannister war machine is moving. The Ravens confirmed it this morning. Tywin Lannister did not wait. He never waits. He is a man who responds to weakness with aggression and to strength with calculated patience. And what Jon's mercy will read as to Tywin is not nobility. It is inexperience. It is the mercy of a young man who does not yet understand what mercy costs. And Tywin will press that assumption as hard and as fast as he can, because he has 3 children in a tower and a dynasty to reclaim, and no reason to stop. Ned's hands tighten at his sides. He turns and walks toward the War Council chamber, where the ravens are already arriving, where the maps are already spread, where the question of what comes next is already demanding its answer. Tywin Lannister has not slept in 3 days. This is not unusual for him. Sleep, he has long believed, is a concession, and Tywin Lannister does not concede anything. He is not absolutely compelled to surrender. He rides at the head of his column in the gray hour before dawn, and the column behind him stretches so far back into the dark that a man standing at its rear cannot see its front, and a man standing at its front cannot see its rear. And both of those men understand that they are part of something enormous and terrifying and without precedent in living memory. 31,000 soldiers, the full Lannister strength, gathered from Casterly Rock and its tributaries, reinforced by every house that still owed the Lion its loyalty, augmented by sellswords purchased in quantities that would have made the Iron Bank of Braavos sit up and reconsider its ledgers. It is the largest army assembled since Robert himself marched on the Targaryens, and it moves with the focused, terrible efficiency of a man who has decided that patience is no longer a virtue he can afford. He thinks in sentences that end before they begin. He thinks the boy king is young. He thinks the Starks are competent soldiers, not generals. He thinks Dorne is passion without precision. fire without architecture. And then he thinks, I have done this before. He has. He has assembled armies and broken kingdoms and watched usurpers fall, and he has understood, with the cold clarity that defines him, that power is not given, and it is not inherited, and it is not even truly won. It is simply held by those with the will to hold it and the intelligence to understand what holding it requires. What Robert's decree had done, Tywin tells himself, was not defeat him. What it had done was force a recalibration. A man of lesser capability would have collapsed in the face of it. A man of lesser capability would have bent the knee, would have made arrangements, would have found some quiet accommodation with the new order. Tywin is not that man. Tywin has never been that man. The Lannisters do not accommodate. The Lannisters do not recalibrate gracefully. The Lannisters burn the field and plant it over again in their own image. And this march, this army, this calculated gamble at the edge of everything, this is what burning looks like when it is done with precision. Jon knows he is coming. Of course Jon knows. The ravens arrived before the dust did. And Jon is not the inexperienced boy Tywin has decided to believe him. This is Tywin's first error, though he does not recognize it as such. He has looked at Jon's age and seen his father's youth. He has looked at Jon's mercy and seen a soft thing, a pliable thing, a thing that can be pressed until it gives way. What he has not considered, what Tywin, for all his brilliance, cannot quite bring himself to consider, is that mercy and weakness are not synonyms. They never have been, but Tywin has confused them before, and powerful men who confuse mercy with weakness tend to discover their error in the worst possible circumstances. Jon rides out to meet him rather than waiting behind walls, and this choice, this single choice, tells every commander who watches both armies take the field that the boy on the dragon's seat understands something fundamental. A siege favors the attacker when the attacker has time. Tywin has time. Jon denies him that time by meeting him in the open, at the Blackwater Rush, where the ground is wide enough for the full weight of both forces to be felt at once, and where Tywin's numerical advantage is offset by the geography of the moment. The northern spearmen form the center of Jon's line, patient, disciplined, unmovable as the landscapes that made them, and they lock shields and lower spears, and dare the Lannister cavalry to find something soft in them. There is nothing soft in them. There never is. The Dornish move on both flanks simultaneously, and the effect is not chaos. The effect is geometry. It is the shape of inevitability, drawn in dust and blood across a field, that will be remembered, if things continue as they are moving, for a very long time. The Lannister line bends. The center holds where the flanks crumble, which is the worst configuration a commander can inherit midway through a battle, because it means that holding the center becomes meaningless as the flanks fold inward, as the geometry closes, as the shape of the thing reveals itself for what it has always been. Tywin sees it happen the way a man sees his own house catch fire from a distance. There is a moment, one clear, terrible moment, where he understands not just that the battle is lost, but that something larger is lost with it. He watches the bannermen. This is what breaks him, finally, in the quiet way that strong men break. Not the military reversal, not the tactical failure, but the banners. House after house that has served the Lannister name for generations, that has owed its holdings, its marriages, its survival to the Lion's grace. Those houses are lowering their sigils, not fleeing, not fighting, lowering, quietly, deliberately, as though they have made a calculation, and the calculation has concluded that the lion is no longer the safest creature in the field. He is surrounded on 3 sides when the rider comes with terms. The rider is young and carries himself with the careful composure of someone delivering a message that has been very precisely worded. The terms are not harsh. They are almost insultingly reasonable, and Tywin understands, in the silence that follows the reading of them, that this too is a weapon. He surrenders with his spine straight and his expression unchanged, and that costs him more than the battle ever could. What he does not know, what no one in his camp yet knows, is that somewhere behind the Stark lines, a letter has arrived that changes the arithmetic of everything that comes after. The letter comes from the far north, and it arrives the way all truly terrible news arrives, quietly, carried by ordinary hands, set down on an ordinary table beside an ordinary candle, its weight invisible until it is opened. Maester Aemon's hand is unmistakable. The letters are small and precise, shaped by decades of practice, rather than by the luxury of sight, and they carry in their very formation a kind of controlled urgency, the urgency of a man who has seen too much to panic, but has finally encountered something that warrants the closest thing to panic his discipline allows. 3 ranger patrols, gone, not lost in the way patrols are sometimes lost, to cold, to wolves, to the vast and indifferent wilderness beyond the wall, gone in the way that leaves no bodies, or rather, gone in the way that leaves bodies that do not remain bodies for long. Jon reads the letter once, then he reads it again, then he sets it down with the careful deliberateness of a man placing something fragile, and he stands very still for a moment, while the candle beside him burns without any awareness of what has just changed. He convenes the lords the following morning. They come expecting councils of reconstruction, the management of Lannister prisoners, the redistribution of obligations, the long administrative work that follows any war's conclusion. What they find instead is a king who has not slept, standing before a table with a single piece of parchment on it, looking at each of them with the eyes of someone who has spent years standing watch on a wall in the dark and knows precisely what it feels like when the darkness begins to move. He does not make a speech. That is the first thing they notice. He reads the letter aloud, from beginning to end, in a flat and even voice, and then he places it back on the table and says that the war they have just concluded is not the war that matters. The lords shift in their seats. Some of them have the expressions of men who have been told something they suspect is true and have been hoping very much would remain unspoken. Ned Stark sits without expression, but his hands are flat on the table before him, perfectly still, in the way that means he is keeping them still deliberately. What Jon understands, what no lord in that room understands with the same cellular, bone-deep comprehension, is that the wall is not a myth, and the threat behind it is not a story that old men tell to frighten children into obedience. He has stood watches in that dark. He has heard the silence that is not silence. He has seen what the cold can do when it is not merely weather but will, and he knows, with a certainty that requires no council and no vote, that if the realm does not turn north now, while it still possesses armies and grain and the capacity for coordination, it will turn north eventually under circumstances that permit none of those things. The mobilization he orders is unlike anything the realm has attempted since the dragons flew. Grain moves north in quantities that make the stewards wince. Weapons follow, not surplus, but good steel, the kind that has been sitting in castle armories since the last war and quietly rusting. Every great house is given a number, a specific and non-negotiable commitment of swords, and the lords who might have debated those numbers find themselves looking at a king who has the combined political gravity of every settlement just concluded still fresh behind him, and who is, very clearly, not interested in debate. 10,000 swords, drawn from the armies of every house that bent the knee, and several that did so more recently than they would like to remember. They move north in columns that stretch across the King's Road like the realm itself has exhaled and begun to walk. The ancient castles along the wall, those long-abandoned structures that have stood empty for generations, tended by no one, remembered by almost no one, their names preserved only in documents that scholars read without any expectation that the names would ever matter again, begin to receive inhabitants. Fires are lit in hearths that have been cold for a century. Banners are hung that have not been hung within living memory. The walls garrison, those black-cloaked men who have spent years sending ravens into a silence that sent nothing back, watches the South fill with movement and dares, cautiously, to believe that the South has finally understood. And then Jon himself rides north. He rides at the head of a host substantial enough that the ground beneath it seems to acknowledge the weight of what is happening. And when the wall comes into view, that ancient impossibility of ice and intention, rising against the sky like a declaration that some things must be held at any cost, he does not slow. He rides through the gates of Castle Black as the first king to do so since Aegon the Conqueror stood in this same passage, with dragons overhead and the world still rearranging itself around his ambition. The men of the Night's Watch line the yard. They are weathered and sparse, and wearing the kind of faces that years of cold and isolation and being largely forgotten by the world below will produce. And when they see him, when they see the brother they knew, the brother who cleaned stables and stood watch and bled on the same frozen ground they bled on, a sound rises from them that is not quite a cheer and not quite a cry. It is something older than either, something that belongs to this place. Jon climbs to the top of the wall as the light fails around him, and he stands at the edge and looks out at what lies beyond. It is dark out there. It has always been dark out there. But tonight, for the first time, the darkness is looking back at something that has finally, fully, decided to look. Far below, a rider dismounts in the yard of Castle Black with fresh dispatches from the south, and among them is a sealed letter that no one yet has noticed carries the wrong wax. Not the red of any house Jon knows, not the black of the Night's Watch, but a pale and colorless seal that leaves a cold impression on the finger of the man who picks it up, even here, even indoors, even beside a fire that is burning as hot as fires in this place ever burn. The letter with the pale seal is opened before dawn, and what it contains does not stay secret long. It is a warning, imprecise in its geography, but precise in its urgency, sent by a ranger who had ridden farther north than any ranger had a right to ride, and had returned not as himself, but as something wearing his shape. The warning is this: they are not waiting anymore. The cold intelligence beyond the wall, the thing that organizes the dead and moves them like pieces across a board made of tundra and silence, has decided that the time for patience is finished. The long night will not creep. It will arrive all at once, a fist rather than a tide, and it will come before the next moon turns. Jon reads the letter twice. He does not panic. He does not need to. What he does is plan. The dispatches from the south have brought something else alongside the pale sealed warning. Confirmations, tallies, supply manifests. The dragonglass shipments from Dragonstone have reached the staging points along the King's Road. Every soldier in the unified Westerosi host carries a weapon touched by it now, a blade or a spearhead or a short knife pressed into even the most reluctant hand. The alliance Robert's final decree made possible. The alliance that Ned Stark had kept from fracturing through sheer stubborn loyalty, that Jon's own legitimacy had given reason to hold, has produced something no one in Westeros has seen in a generation. A single army, one army, moving with one purpose, answering to one king who has no reason to lie to it. Jon rides north with them the following morning. He rides at the front. The battle at Hardhome is not beautiful. It is not the kind of thing that becomes a legend while it is happening. Legends are something other people construct later, at a safe distance, in warm rooms with wine in hand. What it is, while it is happening, is hours of cold and iron, and the particular exhaustion that lives in the arms of a man who has been swinging a sword longer than the human body was designed to swing one. The whites come in their thousands. They come in the dark, which is where they are strongest, where the ice seems to breathe. Jon holds the line. He holds it not because he is without fear, but because the weight of everything that brought him here, Robert's dying hand pressing a seal into wax, Ned's quiet dignity in a great hall full of calculating eyes, the men who followed him north because they believed the truth was worth following, that weight will not allow him to yield. He finds the Night King near the end of it, not by accident, by the same logic he has applied to everything since the ravens first started coming, by working backward from the only ending that matters and placing himself where that ending requires him to be. Longclaw catches the moonlight for one brief moment before it doesn't need to anymore. The dead stop, not gradually, all at once, as if a great and terrible calculation has been completed, and the result is silence. Jon stands in that silence for a long time. The return to King's Landing takes weeks, but it feels like something longer, like the slow unwinding of a tension that has been living in the bones of the realm since long before anyone now living was born. The city receives him in the strange hush that follows great terror and great relief, a hush that cannot quite decide whether to become celebration or grief. Jon does not try to decide for it. He rides through the gates without ceremony, ghost, a white shadow at his horse's flank, and he meets Ned Stark at the steps of the Red Keep, with the particular quiet of two men who have said everything important already and do not require the occasion to perform. Ned is confirmed as Hand. The appointment is not political theater. It is the acknowledgement of a simple truth, that this man has held the realm together with the same steady hands that held Jon's own life safe for 15 years, and the realm knows what those hands are worth. The alliance with Dorne is sealed not through threat or marriage contract, but through 3 days of careful conversation, through the patient work of diplomacy that war makes possible only when it is conducted honestly. Jon is an honest king. He knows how rare that is. He intends to remain one. The world that emerges from all of this is not perfect. No world constructed from the wreckage of old lies and old wars ever is. But it is unified in ways that would have been unimaginable 2 years ago, and it is honest in ways that Westeros has not been in living memory. And those two things together, unity, and honesty are enough to build from. Jon stands on the walls of King's Landing in the last hour before full dawn, ghost pressed warm and vast against his side, and he looks out over the city spreading below him in the gray and gentle early light. He thinks about a dying king in a dim room who chose, at the very end, to let the truth outlive him. He thinks about what that choice made possible. Every alliance, every soldier armed with dragonglass, every moment the line held at Hardhome, every dawn that followed a darkness that did not win. He bows his head once, in silence, in the direction of a grave he has never visited but will. Then he turns back toward the city and begins the long, careful, necessary work of serving it. And this brings us to the end of this alternate history. If you enjoyed exploring how events might have unfolded differently, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. We dive into new stories from the world of Westeros every single day, imagining the choices, battles, alliances, and destinies that could have completely changed the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. I'd also love to hear your thoughts. What do you think would have happened next? Did this version of history end better than the original? Or would you have taken the story in a completely different direction? Leave your ideas in the comments, because many of the best future stories come directly from your suggestions. Thank you so much for watching and for spending your time with me. I'll see you tomorrow with another alternate history from Westeros. Until then, peace out.